We're very conscious in UCD of a number of things. One, UCD's involvement in the Easter Rising. We're the only Irish university that can claim a genuinely active role. Secondly, we're very conscious of the fact that we hold in the archives and in other collections a significant amount of material. We're also very conscious that in the run-up to 2016 there is a growing interest in that from teaching, from teachers, researchers, etc. So what we deliberately focused on in this project is collecting what I would describe as ephemera, the kind of stuff that is often so hard to come by in connection with any past event. Again, I echo a lot of the things that Dermot has said in terms of we are moving from a print age, we're moving into a multimedia age, and I think people now expect to learn and be taught in a much more multimedia environment. And part of the focus was on A, capturing the ephemera, and B, capturing this range. I'm very, very struck particularly by some of the visual material that comes through at various levels. Now this, for example, this really captured my attention. It's a book, Wilson Hartnell, 1917, Equal on the Liffey, the whole thing, the whole description of it. And what it contains is a series of illustrations of the destruction of Dublin. Now, it's one of several books that we have in the collection from 1917, giving you these images of the destruction of central Dublin. The question that arises, there's a market for this. What does it tell us? What kind of messages is it sending? Dublin is one of the first cities in the British Isles, and I'm going to use that term, and please don't hit me for it, to have been subject to mass modern bombardment. And there was a fascination with this. And people bought this because there are several of these collections. And this in a sense, tells us something about how the Rising was made known to people at the time. And I personally found this, it made me think about it. It made me move away from the kind of spiritual event, symbolic event, to begin to consider much more the impact on civilians, the impact on daily life, and the Clark Diary, which is also digitised, gets you into an awful lot of that. I mean, this was actually this wasn't just a symbolic stance in the GPO. It is something that is much more destructive and much more physical and much more violent than that might indicate. And one of the messages I think that comes across from this is that you will also at some stage see a slide coming up which also comes from one of those volumes. Yeah, this one. This is found in the ruins of Liberty Hall after the bombardment. The message there is this is part of the Great War, and that is one of the messages, the German connection being, and that is one of the images. Another thing that really comes through this material, and there's an awful lot of it, is that the heroes of 1916 were largely unknown men. It's one reason why there was so much focus on Roger Casement. He was the only genuinely known name. And one of the things you get after the Rising is a huge amount of this kind of material, which is introducing the people of the Rising to an unknown public. In other words, their legend, their story has been crafted. And one way the whole story of the Rising is getting out there. The history message that comes across is twofold. One, a lot of it is that this is part of the European war, and I think we have to write that back. There is an attempt to integrate those who fought in Flanders or the Somme with those. And I think one way you do it is by beginning to consider the messages that come across from that. Another message that comes across at a very early stage is the poetry. This is a poet's rebellion. And forget about W.B. Yeats, or at least don't forget about W.B. Yeats, but remember people other than W.B. Yeats, because his great poems don't appear for several years. Within a year of the Rising, you can buy a whole series of anthologies of commemorative poems for the Rising. I think another thing that can be looked at here is the print and calligraphy and the way that they used, I think, just wonderful stylized images. This is very, very important, I think, in our understanding. These are the memorial masses a year later, April, May 1916, and the way they are, the memorial cards and so forth. So I think what this collection does for people is, first of all, it increases their understanding of the Rising. It gives them an immediate contact with the story, not just from the secondary histories, which are very fine. This I'm showing you, this is 1917. only a few, Irish War News, which was published during the Rising, only a few left, 5 guineas each. It was a shilling if you'd bought it in Easter 1916. It has certainly expanded in price phenomenally within 12 months. So what you can see from all of this, and I think they're well worth looking at, how quickly the media move into print to immortalize, to memorialize those who fought in the Rising. And this book particular doesn't just deal with the leaders, it also lists everybody who's deported, everybody who's interned, it lists all the categories. So you have a role of honour being established at a very early stage. And of the poets, the one I would draw your attention to is John Francis McEntee, better known to us as a much more prosaic Minister for Finance, who is featured at this stage as one of the poets of the insurrection, some of his poetry in the collection. So I think where this stuff is very, very important is when you deal with the aftermath of the Rising. You're always told the deaths of these people, the blood sacrifice, transforms opinion. I think there are a lot of other things that transform opinion. I think conscription, I think a whole lot of other things come to play. But you then try to engage with how is that transformation taking place. And this is one way the transformation is taking place. There is a huge popular media out there of material that could be bought, that probably reached into most households in Ireland, about the leaders of the Rising, about the rank and file of the Rising, about poetry about the Rising, and a huge material culture. And I think what this collection does really exceptionally well is capture that sense. I learned an awful lot. I got much more closely into the whole Rising and how it would have impacted on the people at the time than I had ever done before, working through much more high-level documents. But basically what I hope we can do, if we work with the National Library and put the two collections of this kind of material together, we will have set up a truly rich resource that school teachers can use, that scholars can use, that people who are just members of the common public who are fascinated by 1916 and the personalities and events of 1916 can use. And that really is the purpose of this particular collection.